Shalom and welcome to another class of Journey Through the Bible. And we are studying a new book, Sefer Melachim Aleph, the Book of Kings. It actually starts with the end of King David's life, but it really just goes through almost all of the kings of Israel. And as we'll note in a future class, the kings of Judah and the kings of Israel, because there is a civil war that takes place. There have been already, as we remember, there are people who didn't want Saul to be the king, and then he became king. And then there are people who sided with Saul and were against David, and all the way through his life, there were still people who were trying to, including his own son who wanted to become, who made himself king. So strife, civil war, disunity, disharmony, greed, these are the bedrock of many of the stories in human nature, and they come from the Bible. The Bible includes that motif as well. So we are and the first verse tells us very clearly, King David was now old, advanced in years, and they covered him with clothing, but he could never feel warm. Now, according to the Midrash, King David was 70 when he dies. That wasn't very old according to the Bible, but there's an interesting Midrash that says that he wasn't supposed to be born at all. There was some kind of destined statement that King David was going to be stillborn. And guess how old Adam, according to this Midrash, was when he died? Adam, the number one Adam, was 930 years old. And you may ask, why wasn't he 1,000? And the answer, according to the Midrash, is he gave 70 years of his life so that King David can live. That's quite an interesting Midrash. It tells us about King David, tells us about Adam, the fragility of life. Anyway, he is old, and he's so old that he can't get warm. So the Torah, the Tanakh, tells us a strange story that the servants said, let's find a virgin. That already sounds weird, right? Who will stand before the king, and she will be his attendant, and let her lie in your bosom, and my lord the king will be warm. And that's exactly what happened. Her name was Abishag the Shunammite, and they brought her to the king, and she was very beautiful, and she became the king's attendant, and she served him, but they never had intimate relations. Why is that an interesting story? Why does the Tanakh feel the need to tell us this bit of information? It's a bit of a mystery. The rabbis interpret it in different ways, but this is what the message. This is what the Tanakh says. I think it's a reflection of David's weakness when he reaches old age. Remember the David who was beautiful, David who was the warrior, David who was the actor, and David was the aggressor, and David who also had a very strong yetzer, inclination, power, desire. And here, this woman he doesn't even sleep with her. So there's some kind of different motif that's at this point in his life. It's not about intimate relations and your yetzer hara. It's really about just having something warm. That's my take on it. All right, that's all we know about this story. We move on. But Adoniah, the son of Chagit. Now, it says the son of Chagit, but he was also the son of David. In other words, it wasn't Stam some random guy. It was Adoniyahu, one of the sons of King David from the woman Chagit. And he was boasting, I will be king. And he provided himself with chariots and horses and 50 people running before him. Where do we remember this idea that in order to become king, you need chariots and horses and 50 people running in front of you? The answer is Avshalom. Same story. Another son is trying to usurp, take the power, become the king. His father never scolded him, never disciplined him, because he heard what was going on. And David did not assert himself. And I think this is really what this is talking about. David asserting himself, or the lack of assertion that takes place. You get old and you don't have the strength. And that's exactly what this chapter is about. He was, by the way, very good looking. And his brother was none other than Avshalom. So it would make sense, after Avshalom died, there was a lot of resentment, there was a lot of ill will. And people started following Adoniyahu. So at the end of his life, another mini rebellion. Okay. Now remember, the last chapter had David sinning, and they needed, 70,000 people died in a plague. So there was resentment. What else happened was, though, in verse 7, is that he acquired supporters, none other than Yoav, the son of Tzuya, and Abiatar, the Kohen. They followed Adoniyahu. Now, it doesn't mean that they rejected David. They supported David. It's just that David needed a successor. So they had sided with Adoniyahu that he will be the successor. But Sadok the Kohen and Benayahu, the son of Yoyada, and Natan the prophet, and Shimi and Rei, the heroes, fighting men, were not with Adoniyahu. Adoniyahu made a sacrificial feast of sheep. Sushi, come here. Come here. He made a sacrificial feast of sheep, of oxen, farlings. He made a big festivity. And obviously, this is, when you do these things, you're preparing to become the king. But who did he not invite? The prophet Natan, Benayahu, and the fighting men, or his brother Solomon. And now we're introduced to Solomon. Now, Natan said to Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon, did you hear that Chagit is Chagit's son, Adoniyahu, is planning to become the king? Do not ruin my new couch. Okay. And David didn't even know. So there's this idea that David was oblivious to what was going on. So here's what happens when a king is old. Here's what happens when someone is infirm. Here's what happens when someone doesn't have the same strength in mind and character as they once had, but they have the power. All of these people try these machinations, trying to figure things out, strategize politics around them, like who's going to be the successor? Who should we follow? how can we make David agree, because he still is the king? This is very sad that this is the reality of what happens. But that's what happens. So Natan the prophet goes to Bathsheba, and he says to her, "You've got to do something." David doesn't even know that his son is about to take the leadership and be the king. So take my advice, and you'll save your life, because what will happen when one son becomes the king? He'll kill everyone else, right? That's just the way, you maintain your kingship. And the life of your son Solomon, who obviously is a threat. Go immediately to King David and say to him, didn't you swear to me that Shlomo, your son, would succeed you and sit on your throne? So why is Adoniyahu the king? Now, while you're saying this, I'll come in and I'll support your idea. So they're plotting, and we don't even know if David said this, right? They're plotting that to say, didn't you, David, say that, that your son Shlomo would become king? We can assume that David did want him to become king, because it was the product of Bathsheba, whom he adored more than anyone else. But nevertheless, the Tanakh doesn't tell us. Lo and behold, verse 15, Bathsheba goes to the king's chamber, and the king was very old, and Avishag the Shunammite was probably lying at his side. Can you imagine? And the queen bows before the king, and he says, "What can I do for you?" Which, this is typical of being a king in ancient times, and even in modern times. You have a lot of women and you have a lot of wives, and you don't exclusively belong to one or any. She bows down many times, and he says to her, "What can I do for you?" And she said, "You, my king, my lord, have sworn in the name of God." We know that that's a serious thing. "To me, your maidservant, that Shlomo, your son, will succeed you and sit on your throne. And lo and behold, your other son, Adoniyahu, is king, and you don't even know. And he's sacrificing a feast, and he's offering sheep, and people are coming, and Eviatar is with him, and Yoav is with him. And Solomon was never even invited. And now all the eyes of Israel are looking upon you, King David, my king. When you go and pass away, if you don't do something, my son and I will be regarded as traitors, and will be killed." Now, while she's speaking, Natan Navi comes, and he tells the king, they say, "Hey, Natan is coming," and he comes in, and he bows down, and Natan says, "You must have said that Adoniyahu will succeed me and sit on my throne, because today he went down to the sacrificial feast, and he called all the people, and they said, 'Yechi HaMelech Adoniyahu, long live King Adoniyahu.' And I wasn't invited, and Tzadok wasn't invited, and Binayahu wasn't invited, and Shlomo wasn't invited." Now, is this a decision from the king? Are you telling me that this is what you wanted to do? Vayan HaMelech David Vayomer. His response was, because Bathsheba had left, he said, "Bring back Bathsheba." She entered, and his king swore in the name of God, who rescued me, that just like God rescued me, just like I swore in the name of God that Shlomo, your son, will become king and sit on my throne, so I shall do on this day. She bows down twice, says, "Yechi Adoni HaMelech David L'olam, long live my King David forever." Now, David calls his confidants, the ones who weren't invited. He says, "Call Tzadok, Natan, Benayahu." They come, And he says the following: take my son Solomon and put him on my mule and bring him down to the Gihon and anoint and let the priest Sadok and the prophet Natan anoint him king over Israel. And you shall sound the horn and shout, long live King Solomon. Then march up after him and let him come and sit on my throne, for he shall succeed me as king. Him I designate to be the ruler of Israel and Judah. And what does Benayahu answer the king? Amen. Cain Yomar Hashem Elohei Adoni Hamelech. May God, the king of my master, says the words, just like I was with my master, the king David, I shall be with Solomon, and he shall rise, and he shall be in the throne of my Lord King. And Sadok Cohen, the priest, and Natan, the prophet, and Benayahu, and the Krati and Plati, they took Shlomo to the Gihon. And it was there that he takes the horn of oil that was in the tent, and he anoints King Solomon and blows the shofar, and the whole nation says, Yechi HaMelech Shlomo, Yechi HaMelech Shlomo. Now, one cool piece of information is that where is the Gihon? The answer is that we know archaeologists have found the Gihon. The Gihon is a natural spring, okay? And it's a natural spring in Jerusalem, in the current area of the city of David. Why is a natural spring important? Obviously, it's an era where you needed water and you couldn't just rely on rainwater. And the Gihon spring was this remarkable aspect of nature that it blew up. It kind of, what's the word? There's a word for it. It comes from the waters from below, and it shoots up periodically. And it has a lot of symbolism, okay? It's miraculous waters that come and show from nothing. All of a sudden, it shows the force of what lies beneath. Interestingly enough, archaeologists found in the city of David a big area that is along the side of the Gihon spring. And it's very possible that that is exactly where King Solomon was anointed, and the whole nation was able to rejoice with him. And all of the nation marched behind him, playing flutes and making merry until the earth was split open by the uproar. And of course, Adoniyahu hears during his feast, his thunder was stolen. Yoav hears all the commotion, says, what's going on? Yonatan, the son of Yevyatar, comes and says, he says to him, you're a worthy man, you shall bring good news. And Yonatan says, but the king, our King David, has anointed Solomon king. And not only that, but he took him with the Tzadok, the priest, and Natan, the Navi, and Benayahu, and Yoav, Krasi, and Plasi, and he went on the mule of the king, which is a direct understanding that this is the choice of the king. And they anointed him in the Gihon. And there was a great commotion. And Solomon sat on the royal throne. And the king's servants blessed our master, King David, saying that God will make Solomon's name great, greater than your name. And he will sit on a chair even greater than yours. And the king bowed low on his couch. In other words, I think the king doesn't want to hear that anyone's going to do better than him other than the son who chooses to succeed him. And the king said, Baruch, v'kach amar melech Baruch, Adonai Elei Yisrael shenatan hayom yoshev al kisi v'einai re'ot. Blessed is God, who provided a successor to my throne that my own eyes can see it. And all of Adoniyahu's guests were frightened. Because remember, what happens when you start a mini rebellion, you're going to get killed. Now, there is the assumption that Adoniyahu was going to be killed by Shlomo. And that is a good assumption. But it's a very interesting thing that there is one place that Adoniyahu could go that in theory, seemingly, protects anyone from destruction. Where is that place? The answer is on the altar of the temple. Now, the temple wasn't built yet by Solomon, right? It wasn't built yet, but they still had a traveling temple, and in it they had an altar, a mizbeach. And if you go and hold on to the altar, it's as if, you can't have bloodshed on the altar. It's not done. And therefore, it seems to be a special dispensation when you hold on to the corner of the altar. And that's exactly what happened. He went at once to the tent and grasped the horns of the altar. By the way, we found an altar with horns meaning like four corners have like these things that come out of it. So archaeologists have found that as well in a place called Khirbet Kayafa. And when Solomon was told that Adoniyahu is fearing Shlomo and he's holding on to the horns of the altar, saying, let King Solomon swear to me that he will not put his servant to the sword, Solomon said, if he behaves like a worthy person, not a hair will fall to the ground. But if he is caught in any offense, he will die. Vayomer lo Shlomo, lech levetecha. And Solomon said, go to your home. This is unusual, right? It's unusual when a king appoints one of the brothers and the other one stays alive. He's going to be a threat until his dying day. But Solomon, in his wisdom, and our next topic is going to be obviously Solomon. He says, as long as you behave, you will be saved. The next chapter is also a long chapter. So maybe we'll suffice with one. Okay, we can go on a little more. Chapter 2. When David's life was coming to a close, he gave his son his last will and testament, his last words. It's a beautiful phrase in Hebrew, Anochi holech bederech kol haaretz. I am going in the way of the earth. In other words, the way that everyone has to go. So be strong and become a man. In other words, it's time for you to take this mantle, not only, in the fact that I've anointed you and appointed you, but also you have to show what it means to have the courage to be the king. First and foremost, David says, and this is so important for us to understanding the personality of David and what's important to him in terms of how to be a king. First and foremost, keep the commandments of God. Walk in his ways. Follow in his laws, his commandments, his rules, his admonitions, as recorded in Torah Moshe, the Torah of Moshe. In order that you will succeed, and in the Hebrew, the word is taskil. It's an intellectual understanding and appreciation in everything that you do. and everywhere you turn. Then the Lord will fulfill the promise that he made me concerning if your descendants follow in their ways of God with their heart and all their soul, they will never be off the line of the throne of Israel. It will never end. Now, this is a very nice introduction. Unfortunately, it doesn't last, because then verse 5 says, okay, now you need to know who did good by you and who did bad, who deserves punishment and who deserves support. He says, you know what Yoav did to me, what he did to the two great leaders and warriors, Avner and Amasa. He killed them. And he stained his kind of pedigree. He stained his with their blood. He stained his. Now, this is he had a complicated relationship with Yoav, who really supported him for so long. At the end, he turned on him. But David says some harsh things. He says, if you're smart, make sure that he suffers before he goes down. In other words, you have to end him. Which this is a very difficult decision. It's very, I guess it wasn't so difficult for David, but that's hard for us to judge. Okay. However, on the other side, Barzillai, the Giladite, he should sit at your table. You should do chesed with him, because he did chesed with me when I was running from Avshalom. And remember Shimi ben Gera, who cursed me when I was running away. And I said, in the name of God, I swore that I would not kill him because he asked for forgiveness. Well, that's just me. You, however, my son, you should probably do some justice or revenge, whatever you want to say, and make sure he dies in blood, cold blood. And those are the last words. And David sleeps with his fathers and is buried in the city of David. And the days upon which David served as king were 40 years, 7 in Hebron, and 33 in Jerusalem. And Solomon sat upon the throne of his father and firmly established his will, his rule. I think I'll stop here because we'll continue, because this is the end of David, and he deserves us to end with him. And we'll continue next week with the new king, the new leader, and all we have to say about King Solomon. And thank you very much, and shalom to all.
Thanks. Have a good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Hold on.
Bye-bye.